So you just bought the brand spanking new Age of Sigmar 4.0 box and you want to start a Skaven army, but you suck at painting. Don't worry about it, because after today you'll know all the dirty tricks and secrets to paint the best looking army in no time. With the upcoming release of Age of Sigmar 4.0 right around the corner, I got really hyped about starting my very own Skaven army, naturally as one does. And I thought, what better way to get things started than make a big project that you guys can follow along and maybe learn something from along the way. Because starting a brand new project can sometimes be quite daunting. However, with a few of our simplest tips and tricks, you can easily up your game and have some epic results. And to make this video as easy and digestible as possible, I've split everything you need to know into 4 super simple steps, each covering one of the 4 most important topics when it comes to painting your army. But before we can jump into this video's first chapter, this miniature really needs a base coat. Now there's 2 rats to paint and I think we should start with the mount. And my idea for this massive, brutal looking rat is to have it look quite pale and worn as if it's seen battle many times. So I'm starting off by making a skin tone with some of the best skin tones I've collected throughout the years. And as always, I start my paint jobs with a quite dark base coat and then work my way up with highlights afterwards. This is the by far best way to get your minis looking stellar without having to use washes and other things that might just ruin everything you worked so hard for. And the reason why I haven't name dropped these paints for you is because they might or might not be part of a massive paint set we might or might not be releasing in the near future. So stay tuned for that one. And with this skin tone mixture, I make sure to cover all of the parts that I really want to feel like naked, fleshy rat skin. Very nice. And in this step you can be quite messy with the application, because you can always fix that in the later steps when we introduce new colors. Then moving on to the fur. Even though I said I want a white fur of this rat, I, as always, start with a quite dark mixture of a dark brown and a medium gray tone. So we get that dark, deep, nice base coat. And here I try not to only fill in the fur parts, I go over and make sure that some of this gray mixture leaks over on top of the previously painted skin tones. And I also make sure to have a jagged edge where the fur tones meet the skin tones, so it looks like fur covering the skin rather than just here's skin, here's fur. Boom. Now that all of the base coats are done for the massive rat, let's move on to the first step. Step 1, blending. Let's start off by discussing the rat's skin. As you might see here, I add a quite drastic highlight to all of the skin parts of the rat. In this case, mixing sunny skin tone and basic skin tone about 50-50. Not worrying about the smoothness and blending at all. And a massive misconception throughout the painting hobby is that super smooth wet blends and glazing for hours upon hours is the only and the correctest way to highlight your miniatures. But that's simply not true by any means, because different surfaces in real life have different textures, meaning this is something we can use to our advantage when painting miniatures as well. It does, however, put a higher demand on the painter, so do make sure that you have a nice moist brush with a fine tip. You apply the paint in gentle strokes, following the shape of the miniature and always pulling the strokes in the direction that the strands of the paintbrush wanna go. Another thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes we see our miniatures from about half a meter to a meter when actually playing with them. And at this distance, your eyes will start to auto-magically blending all those colors and shapes together, which means even your highlights will start to blend even further. Even at a shockingly close distance as 20 to 30 centimeters, your eyes will start blending all those colors together.
So what does this mean, Lucas?
Well, if we combine both of these two things, your sucky eyes and adding textures, you can start making super drastic jumps in terms of brightness for your highlights. And it's still gonna look amazing. As you can already start telling from this step, this is moving so fast and it's still looking really good, especially from afar. Once I'm quite happy with the skin tones, it's time to start painting the fur. And here we can start utilizing those textures even more. Because as all of you professionals surely know, fur is made up from single small strands of hair. Which means that in this area we can start applying the highlight by making single strokes using the tip of the brush in a downwards motion, following the shape of the brush, creating these amazing textures as you can see here. And similarly to what we did with the skin, we can push the contrast between the base color and the highlight color quite a bit without losing that smooth but high contrast look. As long as you always remember to place the highlights in the correct spot, but more on that later. And as you can see where I'm getting a bit more paint on the mini, not only will it help create a really cool looking miniature, but it will also help your eye into blending these colors even further. And this might not look like something that will save you time initially, but trust me, the more you practice, the faster you will be. And while I continue making the final textures on this rat, let me talk about this week's sponsor, Squarespace. Most people go through their lives with different side hustles, different hobbies and different projects. However, none of those people ever manage to do anything worthwhile with it. If only those people would have known about Squarespace, their lives would be so much easier. Because with Squarespace 1 million gazillion award-winning templates, life has never been easier to showcase your artwork, create galleries, or just sell your products or services online. And now it's easier than ever thanks to Squarespace brand new Blueprint AI that guides you and helps you create your website even if you don't have any prior knowledge of web design or coding or anything like that, just like us. So if you're one of those that has a project that you really want to showcase online, right now if you follow our link you can try it out for free for 30 days, and then when it's time to check out just enter the code Squidmar, you get a 10% discount of an entire purchase of a website and a domain. Now that you guys have seen me starting all the highlights for the massive rat, let's teach you guys the principles of how to actually highlight. Step 2. Where the f to place your highlights. You guys have heard us talking about this many a times before, but correct highlight placement can really make or break a decent, good, or quite frankly bad looking army or single miniature. Now, take this rat. Imagine the miniature being set in their own environment with their own light source. The most common one being the bright sun atop the sky. That means that everything pointing towards the light source, in this case the sun, will be highlighted. Everything else will be in shadow one way or another. And we can also determine that the closer an area is to the light source, the brighter the highlight will be. If we go back to the rat, the highlight on her feet won't nearly be as bright as the final highlight on the top of the rider's head. Now you might say, Lucas, this is such an over-exaggeration. This is not how it would look in real life. It's too small to be affected in this such a grand way. Shut up, Steve. This is one of the good things. It's very nice that we can deliberately increase the contrast throughout the entire piece, directing where to put the viewer's attention the most. What do you say now, Steve, huh? I actually had a comeback point. Boom! Fuck you, Steve. This is, without a doubt, the best part of correctly placing your highlight, because you get to direct the viewer's attention to whatever parts of the miniature that you really want to emphasize. But another super important thing about highlight placement is to connect them correctly throughout all of the surfaces of your miniature. And as you can see here, I make sure to connect all of the muscles on the rat skin so that it feels like one uniform surface rather than having those floating muscles. And of course, keeping the previous step in mind and paying zero f***s to blending. And another thing that you can see throughout this paint job is that usually when we see other people, the first thing we recognize with those people is the face, the torso from sort of the chest up, and what the f*** they're doing with their hands. So what does this tell us for miniature painting? Well, we should strive to have the most focus and most attention paid to all of those said areas. And a great way to do this is, as we said previously, to deliberately punch the highlights, make the contrast ever so slightly higher, and just paying that extra bit of time around those areas.
Very good.
Very good. You can almost imagine there's an entire army of spotlights always ready, shining them at the faces of your miniatures. Step number 3, picking nice f***ing colors. For this Skaven Lord, I knew that I wanted a red armor and a yellow cape. But if I were to do this with a super bright red and a super bright yellow cape, things wouldn't look as realistic because both those colors would be fighting for your attention. Instead, I decided that I wanted the red armor of the rat to be in focus. So when picking the yellow tones for my cape, I opted for a more desaturated yellow olive tone. In the big picture, once painted and everything is done, this will still read as a yellow cape, however not pull too much focus from the red armor. And just as before, I started off with a quite dark base coat and worked my way up with a few but deliberately placed highlights. Then when painting the red armor, I go for more deep, saturated, clear red tones to make sure that I really have a nice and saturated red armor. And all of this I do because on top of placing your highlights correctly and making sure to incorporate textures throughout your paint job, picking nice colors for your minis is obviously a massive part to making them look good. And I'm very sure that you've heard plenty of people rave on about color theory and using color wheels to pick your correct colors for your army. And yes, this is something that can be important and can be quite useful. However, I do think that this is something that sometimes can be unnecessarily difficult for beginner painters. For all of those amazing minis that you paint, you don't really need to make it more difficult than just to pick colors that you like. So if you do want to paint a green space marine with pink and yellow details, go for it. The things you do want to keep in mind, however, is to understand why we pick some colors that are more saturated in some areas and some other paints that are more desaturated in others. Just as for this piece, where we have the super clear saturated red armor and a bit more of a desaturated yellow tone and an even more desaturated fur and skin tone on the massive rat. Step 4, painting the correct fucking details. Now that this mini is starting to get close to done, we're moving on to the worst part of this entire hobby. Painting details. And to just bear this atrocious feeling, something I like to do when painting my armies is to pick out what details to put focus on. And for this miniature, the details that I wanted to stand out the most is the massive blade on the halberd, the glowing rocks inside the massive rat's skin. But before I get to paint those, I actually have to paint some of the boring areas too. For the blade, I will try to replicate the effect that the heavy metal team painted for the box art of this miniature, but just make it a bit more my style and simple for you guys. To start this awesome blade, I made sure to paint the edges with dark sea blue, and before the paint was dry, I added some dark green in the center of the blade. Then, using a bright and saturated green, Scorpio green, I start adding my first highlights to the center of the blade. But unlike the previous highlights that we always made sure were angled towards the top, I now add the highlight to the bottom of these grooves, making it look like the light is being bounced off a shiny surface. Then for the remaining parts of the blade, I mix the dark sea blue with some ice yellow and apply the highlights in the same way as the green. And as a final step, I make sure to add some super fine highlights using pure ice yellow only to the very most raised areas and the edge of the blade. And as a final step to the blade, I add a final highlight of yellow-green and make sure to not overdo this and only apply it in small dots and super crisp edge highlights. Then the final detail that I will make sure to paint on this miniature is the base. Moving in with the same super vibrant greens I used for the blade, for the flowing energy warp pool at the bottom, making sure to highlight these as if they were lit by our general lighting. Now I'm just gonna finish all the last details on the base and then move in with the shit ton, an absolute metric ton of grass tufts, covering up everything we've already painted. The rat skin, rider, the armor, Emil's mother.
Lucas.
We will cover them all with grass tufts.
You are wrong.
I will cover the edges around the warp pool with grass tufts. Now, before you guys get to see the grandest of reveals, if you want to see more of this type of video and maybe even more of this type of video, make sure to smash the living crap out of the like button below the video, maybe even subscribing. And on top of that, if you wonder about any of the gear or tools or whatever we're using in the videos, we've got it all listed on our website, squidmar.com. And with that said, it's time for a grand reveal! And I really liked how this project turned out. I truly think that my Skaven army is gonna look really cool, and I have more stuff in the pipeline coming up in the near future. And as always, a massive thanks to this week's amazing sponsor, Squarespace. You guys are the best, you know it already by now. And also our amazing patrons. You guys are so good. You make sure that we can do this full-time for a living. Without you, we wouldn't be here. So with that said, have a great day. Bye bye!